Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Honda. And Hitachi, in association with Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to Eurosport's live coverage of the 1992 Grand Prix season. This afternoon here in Barcelona, live, the Grand Prix of Spain at the Circuit de Catalunya, and you're looking at Ayrton Senna, who will start third on the grid. That's this afternoon. Now the warm-up. And John, the warm-up, everybody trying to get out because the track is wet but drying.
Yes, we've had 24 hours of unbroken rain. It stopped early morning, and now we're seeing Nigel Mansell trying to get onto the track as quickly as he can. And what Mansell looks to be on, in fact, slick tires, or can you tell? It's hard to tell at this distance. Certainly the circuit is quite wet at this point, but the rain has stopped, the cloud base is high, and we're just hoping that there won't be any more rain this weekend.
A similar situation to last year, and incidentally, last year the track dried up very quickly, but the only worrying bit about that is that there's no wind.
No wind at all, and of course with the amount of rain we've had over the last 24 hours, the circuit has become saturated. But I think through this session we'll see the beginnings of a dry line, and of course there's some 5.5 or so hours before the Grand Prix itself starts, so hopefully the ambient temperature will rise, and the combination of that and the cars on the circuit we'll find a dry circuit for the Grand Prix itself at 2 o'clock.
Well, the grid for the Grand Prix this afternoon, Nigel Mansell, of course, his 21st pole position of his career. Then Michael Schumacher joins in on the front row, his best qualifying performance to date. Then it's Ayrton Senna and Riccardo Patrese on the second row. Ivan Capelli, the fastest of the Ferraris, although Jean Alesi was fastest in all the wet sessions held.
Yes, Ferrari were very, very pleased indeed after the Saturday qualifying session to be the quickest car. And reports coming back from Luca de Montezemolo, the team manager at Ferrari, indicating his pleasure and delight. Of course, it takes a lot of pressure off the team to be quickest in a session, even though it's a wet weather session. And Nigel Mansell there managed to get squeezed out, almost got pushed off the side of the track. This is the first lap of this unofficial session on Sunday morning, and look, see cars coming onto the straight, squirreling, trying to find grip. Was in car with Mansell. Mika Hakkinen just ahead of him. Of course, the circuit in these conditions is probably in fact more difficult to drive than it would be if it was completely wet as it was yesterday. The way rain tires operate is quite different in wet weather than it is to these just damp conditions.
John, it's very hard to see what tires Nigel Mansell's on, but all of the people driving back into the pits at a very slow speed are on slicks, I think.
Well, I think most people went out on the basis that the track might be drier than they actually thought it was. They were looking probably at the track directly in front of the pits, and on the left-hand side of the main straight, it looked reasonable. It certainly wasn't dry, but it was possibly dry enough to take the chance in going out in slicks. But around the back of the circuit, as we've been able to see, there's still a lot of loose water, a lot of parts of the track that are just too wet for those slick tires, so people coming back in. It's also normal, of course, for the cars to do one out lap, come straight back into the pits to allow the teams a chance to give a quick spanner check to the car, since most teams have done a complete rebuild overnight. Most teams will have fitted new corners to the car. That's 4 new suspension, pre-built corners. The gearboxes will be assembled with new internals, new gears, and in many cases, some of the cars, teams will fit fresh engines for the Grand Prix itself.
Well, and in these conditions, it's hard to make a decision to keep running or to stay in the pits until the track has dried, especially for the Benetton team, where they've only got 2 of their new V192 cars left.
Well, I think Benetton have wisely decided not to go out initially in this session. That both cars are still in the pits. They lost one chassis on Friday afternoon when Michael Schumacher stuck it in the wall, and then Michael sort of blotted his copybook a second time on Saturday morning when he spun off towards the end of the session and wiped out yet another nose on the new 192. So they have to be a little bit thoughtful about what they're going to do this morning. They don't really want to put both cars out and really expose themselves to any more damage.
Jean Alesi in the number 27 Ferrari. Alesi, who was quickest in both wet sessions yesterday morning and yesterday afternoon. He did a lot of laps. He's going to start 8th on the grid, but from that 8th position, if we do have a wet Grand Prix, well, he's certainly one of the favorites.
Yes, his big trouble, of course, is going to be getting from 8th on the grid up to being at the front of the pack, and in wet weather conditions, that is not an easy task. But Alesi really got on with the program very impressively indeed, and of course he was only able to do that because his car seemed to work much better in the wet than we've seen it working so far this year in the dry. And of course that often is an indication to a team that the car really is fundamentally not working very well at all. Cars that are fast in the wet but well off the pace in the dry usually have got some major problem that most teams recognize and then can take a lead from.
On board with Gerhard Berger at the moment. Gerhard not having a totally happy time. He qualified 7th with that still new McLaren MP47. Fly-by-wire, as Ron Dennis says, a new Honda V12 engine, but they're getting closer to the pace Nigel Mansell setting, and here Berger just trying to get the power on the ground. It's not easy. On the right top of your screen you can see where he is on the circuit. He's nearly completed another lap, one more right-hand corner to go, but Gerhard decides it's time to get into the pits and check the car over.
Yes, because one of the problems for a driver is if on the Friday, which is a dry session, you don't have a good qualifying time, then as we saw yesterday, wet weather, no chance of improving. The penalty of not being with the program on Friday really, I think, was more graphically illustrated than, for example, with Stefano Modena and Ukiya Katayama. They both had problems in the Friday session and they weren't in the top 2016 cars. The consequence is that those 2 cars, 2 drivers, are not going to be taking part in today's race. So really, it is very, very important indeed. You can never overstate the value of being with the program in that Friday qualifying session.
We've had 5 people so far completing laps. Fastest of them is Mika Häkkinen, who has done 3 laps on a 1:51.585. Gianni Morbidelli is second, Christian Fittipaldi third, Nigel Mansell and Andrea de Cesaris are the only other people that have completed more than 1 lap at the moment. Ayrton Senna, who yesterday after the wet session said, John, that he would have stand a better chance in the wet than in the dry. It's quite a funny remark to make for a guy who said last year in Australia that wet weather racing was a bit crazy.
Well, certainly what they saw in Australia last year was atrocious. What we had here yesterday was pretty bad, but certainly the circuit itself contributed a lot to the conditions. There's very good drainage here, although in some parts of the circuit there was water running across the circuit. There weren't the deep puddles that the Australian Grand Prix suffered from. Nonetheless, when you're running competitively, as Senna was doing in the rain, you tend to maybe alter your opinions about things slightly. Nigel Mansell here, you can see him just coming up around the back of the circuit to the final two corners that lead on to the start-finish straight. And of course, the circuit here is still very wet indeed. And he's just being fairly prudent about how he wants to just make his way around. There's no point in being a hero at this stage in the proceedings. Mansell deciding he wants to go into the pits. Of course, he's got the choice of two cars. He has a spare car and his regular race car. And it was in that spare car we saw him running, and Patrese, for that matter, the new 1992 Renault RS4 engine. Now, they don't plan to use that in the race. It was just in the spare car as a qualifying engine. But really, it's not going to be very long in the future when we see Renault committing themselves to that engine for not just qualifying, but for Grand Prix as well.
We saw Michael Schumacher leave the pits on weather tires, and if we quickly go through the top 10, because there's more and more people getting out, of course, it's Ivan Capelli who's fastest, then Mika Häkkinen, Christian Fittipaldi, Gianni Morbidelli, Johnny Herbert in 5th, Martin Brundle 6th, Thierry Boutsen 7th, Nigel Mansell's 8th, Andrea De Cesaris 9th, and Pierluigi Martini is 10th. For times well off the Friday afternoon dry pace. Probably won't get close to that because the track isn't drying that fast.
No, the ambient temperature is really still, it's only about 10 or 11 degrees Celsius, so the prospect of any assistance in a quick drying on the racetrack, that's going to take, I would think, the rest of the morning before we do see any signs of the track getting back to normal. Of course, there is another race here. There's a little Foxhole race, one of the support events to the Barcelona Grand Prix. Another 35 or so of those little things buzzing around. At least we may have a chance to get a bit more activity on the track. But it is a problem in Barcelona. We saw it last year when the race started in wet conditions and then dried. When to make a pit stop being very crucial indeed.
Well, we're looking at Michael Schumacher at the moment, while the Ferrari still is the quickest car on the circuit. Ivan Capelli on a 1:44.636, and that car seems to work really well when the conditions are like this. Michael Schumacher just completing his first lap of the session. Martin Brundle down to 1:48.229, and times improving all the time. And I think we can say that's for the whole session, unless it starts to rain again.
Of course, most of the cars will be running with their fuel allocation at this point. Some of the better prepared teams might have attempted to do that on Friday morning. The most would have been preparing to do it on Saturday morning. And undoubtedly a few did run full tanks even in those very wet conditions. But now everybody will have the cars with the amount of fuel in the race that they require. The one exception to that is normally Ferrari, and they tend to run 2/3 of their fuel allowance because they consider that that's the amount of fuel the car runs at for a longer period in the race than it does with that 220 odd litres that they require for the full race distance.
Ayrton Senna just setting his fastest lap of the warm-up, 1:46.358. He's 4th quickest at the moment, but Ivan Capelli is faster than anyone else on a 1:44.636. Then Gerhard Berger, who's moved up to 2nd. Riccardo Patrese 3rd. Ayrton Senna 4th. Martin Brundle is 5th, and Patrese improving again. He's getting closer to Ivan Capelli. There, Michael Schumacher, his first flying lap is a 1:47.003. Teammate Martin Brundle following him on 1:46.467.
I think Michael Schumacher, after his 2 little episodes into the gravel traps, has been advised to be very, very cautious indeed. He's got his first front row grid position in his career, and Benetton don't want to jeopardize that by a little bit of rational or irrational, let's say, driving in this on-time session. Martin Brundle, confidence building all the time now that he's beginning to establish himself in the Benetton team, and you come to terms with having Michael Schumacher, the very, very quick and very young German driver. So Martin Brundle's confidence getting higher and higher all the time.
Ivan Capelli still fastest in this still wet warm-up. We continue after the break. Stay with us. Keep watching Eurosport.
Eurosport Live.
Welcome back here live at Barcelona. We're looking at Frank Williams, and his driver with the car number 6, Riccardo Patrese, has just done a 1:44.130 and is now fastest.
Yes, we're looking at his teammate Nigel Mansell, and we believe Mansell is in fact not on wet weather tires, is on dry weather slicks. And Mansell taking advantage of this session to get a feel for the car. And if the circuit was not totally dry at the beginning of the race, undoubtedly he will benefit from knowing what the circuit feels like with these dry weather tires. So a little bit of, I suspect, team strategy being played by Mansell. You imagine, we suspect that Riccardo Patrese is on wet weather tires, but Mansell here, you can see, being very, very prudent with the throttle. Everything he's doing, the steering, braking, is done very, very gently indeed. No sudden inputs. Just trying to feel all the time for the pit. Now we have Patrese in the pits, having a fairly heated discussion with one of the engineers. You can see the wet weather tires on Patrese's car. And here we are back to the third place man on the grid, Ayrton Senna. Senna worked very hard on Friday afternoon to get onto the second row of the grid. And then on Saturday he was very pleased with the performance of the car in the wet, believing that if there is to be a wet race, that in fact that probably would be more to their advantage than a dry race.
Gerhard Berger just setting his fastest lap of this morning session. Moved up to, or still is in second place, 1:44.224. A tenth slower than Riccardo Patrese, but quicker than Ivan Capelli. Michael Schumacher moved up to 4th. Ayrton Senna back to 5th. Jean Alesi is 6th. Martin Brundle 7th. Michele Alboreto 8th. Bertrand Gachot is 9th. And Thierry Boutsen 10th. And that's the man you're looking at.
Yeah, here we are back in car with Mansell. And so far Mansell really hasn't appeared in the top 20 times. And we see him down in 24th. His time is 1:52.042. So that represents a dry weather tire time as opposed to the 1:44.130. Now right now you'd have to say if the race conditions were like this at the start of the Grand Prix, there's no doubt about starting on wet weather tires. That time differential, 12 seconds per lap, much, much too great.
People coming in, changing to slicks. We can see them slithering around the circuit, and the people that still have wet weather tires probably have more grip. But the problem, of course, John, is as soon as you drive on too long on those wet weather tires, you burn them out, and if it starts to rain after that, you've got nothing.
Well, I think the strategy again of this decision, whether you start on dry weather tires from the track is like it is now, in the hope that you don't lose too many seconds per lap, but gain overall when people then start to lose time. The crossover point between wets and dries is always crucial, but it really depends on the circuit itself, and I think principally on the ambient temperature, because while 26 cars going around the circuit do help create a dry line, if the ambient temperature is not very high, it takes a long, long time. So the benefit of starting on slicks is offset by that low ambient temperature. You see Nigel, he's more or less, other than that quick pit stop at the beginning of the session, he stayed out all the time. And it's this kind of commitment that could in fact help him win the race if the start of the race is in conditions which are not totally dry.
Nigel just improving to 150.085. He's up to 16th place and only, well, 6 seconds slower than the fastest man so far. But I suppose he wants to see now how quick he can close that gap.
Yes, of course, a lot of the people that have done their times on wet tyres will also be sitting watching what Mansell and anyone else on slick tyres is doing. So the teams are not necessarily going to get a very clear indication as to what point, what lap time is the point at which you want to say, right, come into the pits and put those dry tyres on. At least Williams have got the benefit of doing a one-on-one situation. Patrese did start on wet weather tyres and remained on them. He's still sitting in the pits. And I expect when he goes back out again that he also will have changed onto his dry weather tyres. But it would appear that something in the low 40s is going to be the point at which you want to think, oh, and looks like Christian Fittipaldi or Andrea Chiesa. We couldn't see, I think it was Chiesa, in fact, who got the car well and truly sideways coming onto the start-finish line. Now Jean Alesi again, he's on slicks. You can see coming into the corner, he turned in, not an awful lot of grip. He was accustomed to doing that on his wet tyres. As soon as he put on the slicks, the car just complete four-wheel slide.
Nigel Mansell going slowly back into the pits. Well, there's sort of 7-8 minutes to go in this session. You think he'll be worried, John, being 17th at the moment?
I would have thought he's not going to be too worried. They did an awful lot of work here in pre-season testing, and also then at the Friday, they got a lot of running on Friday morning and Friday afternoon. They know the car pretty well. They're aware of the varying track conditions. So they will be more or less, I think, on top of any of the situations that may arise. Ayrton Senna now leaving the pits to get back onto the circuit. Both teams, I think, will want to get at least one of their cars running on slicks as quickly as possible, because really that information will be valuable. You see Mads, so that cover over his nose, that's to prevent the hot air he expels through his nose or through his mouth, depending on how hard he's breathing. He diverts that down and out of the bottom of the helmet. Oh, that's why he came in, I think.
It's a funny bit of smoke, just black smoke coming out of the back of that exhaust, and we've got a new fastest lap, 1:42.021, and that is Gerhard Berger, who's just crossed the line in his McLaren, and I don't really know whether he's on slicks or wets.
Mansell, you can see now definitely on wets. Coming back out again.
It's interesting, John, because Jean Alesi, who's out on slicks, as we thought, in this session, there he is, number 27 in the Ferrari. He's doing 1:45 at the moment, which is like a good 5 seconds faster than Nigel Mansell was doing when he was out on slicks.
Well, we have to wait and see what Mansell does on his wet weather tyres. At least that'll give us some indication of what the track condition is like in reality, as he was one of the few men that spent any amount of time this morning on the circuit. The circuit's still really very damp indeed. It's more damp than it is wet. Yesterday afternoon, the circuit was really, really flooded, and that's when the rain tyres work at their best. In these kind of conditions, in fact, looking at Alesi, he's actually still on wet tyres. But Nigel Mansell now and Riccardo Patrese back on the circuit. Patrese currently second quickest. We have to wait now for Mansell to complete his out lap and give us an indication as to where he thinks the decision will lie as regards what tyres he would want to use if this was going to be the conditions he had to face in 5 hours or so time.
Looking at Riccardo Patrese, but we've missed Jean Alesi, although the camera has missed Jean Alesi, just crossed the line. He's on a 1:42.779, and that puts him second behind Gerhard Berger in the McLaren. Riccardo Patrese still third, Ivan Capelli is fourth, and Michael Schumacher is fifth.
Well, there is the Tio Pepe girls, of course, are the sponsor of this year's Spanish Grand Prix. And, Frank Williams, looks like Jean-Marie Balest, just behind Frank Williams, the former president of FISA. He is the current president of FIA.
One thing that does interested me, John, is that we were looking at the circuit just before the warm-up started, and you said, well, there's a bit of a dry line appearing. Well, the dry line is still there. It doesn't get any better.
No, it's not. That's the extent of the water that's soaked into the tarmac, and that's going to take quite a long time to evaporate away, and even with 26 cars running, it has made no impression whatsoever. But there's not really any spray coming off the tires. You're not seeing the big rooster tails of spray you normally expect. The water is clinging into that tarmac. And this is a little bit of what we had last year, the first time the Grand Prix was held at the new circuit in Barcelona. Really, what a fantastic facility it is here. It's one of the few new circuits that's got a decent long straight. And the facilities themselves for the teams to work in, for the garaging, the media center and the corporate hospitality above the media center is outstanding indeed, and certainly makes our job a lot easier.
Well, people are going quicker and quicker, but Gerhard Berger was up till now, or is up till now, the only man who's constantly in the 142s. Then it's Jean Alesi in second place. He's on a 142. Riccardo Patrese on a 144.130 still. Ivan Capelli, Michael Schumacher, Bertrand Gachot up to sixth, which is another good performance from the Belgian. Then Ayrton Senna, Michele Alboreto, Martin Brundle, and Nigel Mansell up to 10th place. But here's another lap nearly finished for Riccardo Patrese. He will cross the line now, and then the time will flash up on the computer. 1:43.521, an improvement. Martin Brundle took over that third place for a short while, but now it's Riccardo Patrese again. And Michele Alboreto is up to fifth.
Yes, we saw Michele Alboreto running very strongly indeed. He was fifth quickest yesterday afternoon when it was very wet indeed, and now he's again in fifth place when the circuit is damp. So whatever footwork have been doing to their chassis, they're beginning to see the potential they always hoped was there. Ivan Capelli. They've got to be so careful coming onto that right-hand corner. Last year we saw the very exciting, spectacular spin of Ayrton Senna. And really the whole circuit is one of these circuits where if you try and lean on a car, just won't accept it. It's quite difficult to judge. We saw a lot of people spinning throughout the weekend, both in the wet and dry conditions. The level of grip has not improved really over last year. We had anticipated that it might, as the circuit matured and settled down, that the circuit may pick up some grip. But in fact, that isn't the case. And even throughout the testing in the wintertime, teams were complaining of no grip, no grip, no grip. And there's some graphic illustrations of that, particularly Michael Schumacher, who somehow or other had a rear tire blister, and then he said that was the reason why he went off. But certainly the difference between grip and being out of control is so fine.
Tracy gone quicker again, 42.191, which puts him very close to Gerhard Berger, and there the man with the checkered flag. We're very close to 10 o'clock, and at exactly 10 that flag will come out. Ayrton Senna.
And look at Bertrand Gachot getting the back of his car well and truly out of line, and also Mika Häkkinen just behind him, saying that corner is slippery, and certainly we're getting a good illustration of just how slippery it is.
Well, and Berger on his last lap improved to a 1:41.784. He's got his car set up right for these conditions. Riccardo Patrese currently second, but there's still a number of people on their last lap. One of them was Ayrton Senna, but he was behind Olivier Grouillard.
Well, at least the conditions are not so bad that you won't have time to look in your mirrors. Olivier Grouillard has been criticised in the past for not always being as cooperative as other competitors would like.
Oh, Senna's gone past him. So, it cost him a couple of tenths, I suppose. Oh, he's not gone past him. Olivier Grouillard currently 19th in this morning warm-up. And there we see the top 8. Gerhard Berger, Riccardo Patrese, Jean Alesi, Nigel Mansell. Then it's Martin Brundle, Bertrand Gachot, Michele Alboreto, Ivan Capelli, Michael Schumacher, and the rest of the top 16 we can see. Well, Berger and Patrese fastest. It's the warm-up of the number 2s.
Yeah, I don't think it's very significant. I think that, cars and teams will try different things. Patrese and Mansell will probably be trying different setups, bearing in mind that it may well be dry for the start of the race, so they've got to find out what the options are going to be, and I'm sure McLaren have been doing similar things.
Well, Riccardo Patrese being pushed back into his garage, and whatever it will be this afternoon, you can watch it live here on Eurosport. John Watson and Allard Kalf will be back live with you at 12:15 in the UK, 1:15 Central European time. Thank you for watching. See you then. Bye-bye.
World Championship was brought to you on Eurosport by Honda. And Hitachi, in association with Pioneer.